your host, Bill Reel. Welcome to another episode of the Almost Awakened podcast. I'm just one of your co-hosts, Bill.
And I'm Mikkel.
So there's the other. And today we're going to talk a little bit about, there were a couple things that were happening in our lives this last week. And then we want to talk a little bit about the book you recommended last week, Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell.
It's so good.
Oh my gosh. So I'm to the point, you were telling me yesterday about this community in Bolivia that drinks, and they just drink all through the night when people pass out. When
just
they
on the
come
weekend.
Just on the weekend. And when they come to, they go right back to partying again. And this is just standard procedure every single weekend. The host, whoever decides to host that week, buys the first bottle of alcoholic beverage and then sends out invitations. And every weekend in Bolivia, these groups of people, whoever these people are, they get together and they drink all through the weekend. And it's like this ritual that's been going on for lots and lots of years.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me.
So maybe let's start there. Let's talk a little bit about this book. What are some of the things that stuck out to you, Mikkel?
The default to truth, how he talks about, so Malcolm Gladwell in his book is quoting another researcher, and this researcher, I forget his first name, but his last name is Levine. And he talks about how, as humans, we often just default to truth. And what that means is there might be red flags that we see or doubts that we have about a person or a story or whatever it is. But we have this default to truth system where we overlook those or we diminish them, because if we didn't, our society would not be able to function. If we thought everybody was lying to us or out to get us, our societies would not function. So we default to truth.
Yeah, there was this conversation going on, and they used certain cases. They talked about Jerry Sandusky, who is the Penn State head coach, who was allegedly, and I think convicted.
I think he's convicted.
Yeah, so convicted that he was essentially sexually raping or sexually assaulting young kids, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. And the other one was a gymnast coach who, for years, was a successful gymnast coach and was constantly coming up with medical reasons to insert his fingers into the gymnast that he was training. And essentially what they were talking about with this truth default system that's inside us, as you just pointed out, in evolution, we are much better off to allow from time to time somebody in the tribe to manipulate and abuse us, but that it's for the better good if we can be cohesive and get along and trust each other and have a tight-knit community. And so when somebody does something, if we perceive that person as like, nah, it couldn't be them, and then suddenly the evidence shows up that there's reason to doubt that they're as good as we thought they were, that the evidence has to be so overwhelming for us to let go of our bias towards believing this person to be a good person, they couldn't have done this, that we often allow people in our communities who are deeply abusive, manipulative, to get away with the things they do.
Yeah, he also talked about two other stories that were really interesting to me. One was about a woman who was a spy for Cuba for years.
Oh, yes.
But she worked for the U.S. government, and one person kind of raised his concerns and said, I think she's not what she says she is. And they did an initial investigation, and, couldn't find anything that really raised enough red flags for them to dig deeper for a couple of years. And so that story was really interesting. And then it tells the story of a guy who was on to Bernie Madoff way before the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme was figured out. And so they talked about him. He doesn't have a default to truth system. I mean, he does, but he overrides it.
Yeah, he distrusts everybody. Like, he starts with the assumption, you're all bullshitting me.
Right. So it was so interesting to hear those other two stories, especially the one about the guy who overrides his default to truth system.
There was also conversation in the book about how whenever we see another person's body language, they use the Amanda Knox story as an example, but judges, whenever
we're fucking it up.
We are. Like, so if we have to determine whether someone's telling the truth or whether they're lying, We only get it right 54% of the time, just above coincidence, just above luck, just above what normal guessing would be. And so we're not very good at it. And in fact, if we plug the data of a court case into a computer, they said, the computer does better than the judge because the judge is often using body language in his determination and often is getting it wrong. And so I can only imagine at this point how many false convictions there are in the U.S. prison system.
It's insane. The book is fascinating, and it's not that we need to distrust everybody now, but it's just interesting to reevaluate the way that we look at people, particularly the way that we look at strangers, people that are different from us.
Yeah, and there was a lot of conversation about, look, there is a portion of the population that their body language matches the sincerity of what they are saying. There are situations where a certain percentage of our population is authentically portraying body language that matches the real thoughts inside their head, but that the majority of us have some level of disconnect there, that when we're telling the truth, we give off body language that we're lying, and when we're lying, we often give off body language that we're telling the truth.
Right. So what's the point of all of this?
Well, what I think it means for me is we have to stop assuming as we go out into society and have interactions with people. Like when I sit at a party with my friends, and I already have spent enough time with each of you that I know you well enough that I am comfortable with, like, oh, those are their quirks and those are their idiosyncrasies. And so those don't throw me off when one of you are telling a story. But when we deal with strangers, we don't know what their quirks are. We don't know what their idiosyncrasies are. We don't know if they're nervous all the time or if they're only nervous when they're lying. And so it just causes me to pause and say, like, okay, let me cut this person a little bit more slack than what I do, and just sit back and allow them to be truthful to what they're saying, and at the same time also now hold some doubts in my head, right? Like it works both ways. Like I need to cut them a break, and I also need to be skeptical.
That is really interesting, and I think it's complicated.
And I think it shows a lot of room to be manipulated by systems too.
Sure.
When you look at the leaders of any system, especially when those systems are unhealthy, and we understand that we collectively default to believing the authorities of those systems as telling the truth, man, it causes me more pause now when I see political leaders or religious leaders, people who have a lot at stake in value in manipulating us, and now I'm just an added level of skepticism towards them.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Was there anything else? Yeah, was there anything else in the book that caught your eye?
So towards the end of the book, he talks about this theory called coupling, and that was also really interesting. And maybe I'll wait till you get to that point and we can talk about it later. But
what does he mean by coupling?
So he's talking about it in relation to suicide in this portion of the book, and how in the I don't remember when he said, I think it was 40s and 50s, in the UK, they used a gas that had a high amount of carbon monoxide in it to heat their homes and stoves and things like that. And because it had such a high carbon monoxide content, it was an easy way for people to commit suicide because they died quickly. And he talks about this poet who used that method. She sealed off the kitchen, locked herself in the kitchen, put towels under the door, and turned on all of the burners, and then stuck her head inside stuck her head inside the oven and committed suicide that way. And so the phenomena is that oftentimes people think that if you remove one method of suicide, people are just going to find another way. But what they found, and he quotes a bunch of researchers, is that when they remove the method that people have been using, they often don't find another way. They don't commit suicide. It was fascinating. So he was telling the story of how the UK eventually phased out that type of gas and started using natural gas, which had a much, much lower content of carbon monoxide, and how even cars nowadays have because of catalytic converters and other things, that it has a much lower level of carbon monoxide. And so that stopped people from using that method. And through research, they found that that group of people didn't find another method. They just didn't commit suicide, and so the phenomena is called coupling. And
wow, that is strange.
Yeah, and how just interesting.
And I would have thought the other way as well. I would have thought,
Right.
like, look, if we take a gun away from them, they're going to just hang themselves or jump off a building.
Right.
Or we come up with like, okay, they're just going to figure out another way. But as you're pointing out, the evidence says that that's not the case, that suicide would drastically go down if you remove that person's primary mode of trying to do it.
Right.
Wow. I'll tell you, when you talk about carbon monoxide, I think I breathed in a lot of carbon monoxide last night. We were at a house with a fireplace, and I think I breathed a lot of that in. So
Is that why your voice is a little raspy this
yeah, I
morning?
think it is. I wasn't breathing too good when I woke up this morning. It was, man, a lot of fun. I'll tell you, I was at a party last night. You guys were there too, and man, I was in one of those headspaces where I just wasn't able to kind of like hold what I wanted to say together. I was just struggling with it, and I know people were probably deeply offended by me because there were people there last night who
I don't think people were.
You don't think so?
No.
Yeah, but see, in my head, I'm going from person to person, and they're all going like, "Hey, Bill Reel, I know you," and I don't know them as well. They've listened to other work that I've done, and so we're having this small talk conversation, and I just realized that I'm not proficient last night, right, at staying in these conversations. And so within a few minutes, I'm finding some way to like move on, because I just want to sit on the couch and be not left alone because I want to be left alone, but left alone because I can't contribute in a way that it just was almost embarrassing. But I ended up on the couch talking to a friend of ours named Ben. And Ben is just, man, the guy is just smart. I mean, he's just brilliant.
Super smart.
Yes. And so I'm sitting here talking to him, and he's talking about reality and some of the podcasts he's listening to, and how humans are, rather than actually enjoying the reality in the moment, what humans are doing is they're actually living out what they predict will happen in the next quarter second. And so we're constantly essentially hallucinating what is going on around us in that moment. Like, yes, everything is where it's supposed to be, but we're projecting how we perceive the conversation's about to go, and then our mind is continually making these adjustments to take in what actually did happen in that moment, and then now predict the next quarter second. And he was going off in this, and it was beyond my pay grade. Like, I'm like, wow, this is deep stuff. This is like evolutionary human behavior combined with like alien science, and I was both amazed and struggled to stay with the conversation. But it was so fascinating just to hear him point to, and I'll put in the links he gave me. In fact, let me pull it up here just so people can go find this. I asked him last night to send me one of these, and he sent me a TED Talk from Lisa Feldman Barrett. She is one of those that was talking about that. And then he also sent me the book Behave by Robert Sapolsky. And essentially what both of those authors or speakers are kind of addressing is the way our brain works moment to moment in projecting your own kind of mindset, trying to make sense of what's going on in the person talking to you, or what you're trying to do at work that moment. I just think we're fascinating creatures, and we don't even comprehend thousands and thousands of mechanisms going on each and every moment in our life to help us make sense of this crazy world.
That's crazy.
What else is going on in your life, Mikkel?
Let's see. Not a lot.
Okay. So you came to my work yesterday. I want to talk about a thing you went to here in a few minutes. You talked last week, we had this grandbaby, and I'm just so thrilled. We've got this.
He's adorable.
Garrett, he is. He's just beautiful. And the moment I saw him, I just fell in love with him. And so Garrett, Chase, Reel are my first grandson. And at the same time that my son and my daughter-in-law were having this baby, my mom had made plans to come here to southern Utah and to visit with us. My mom's dealing with some illness, and some of that illness has, at various points, kind of had some effect on her mental capability. And she flies in. The plan was she was supposed to fly into Vegas 11 o'clock on Saturday night, and she lands the plane at 11:15.
She lands it?
Well, yeah, she just, overtook the cockpit, threw the pilot off to the side, and just flew the plane herself. So she is flying an airport. You're messing me up. Let me tell you something. I'm barely holding it together. I'm barely holding it together, and you're throwing wrenches. You can see I'm really struggling to put sentences together. So the airplane lands at 11:15. My mom is supposed to go get her rental car immediately, pick up her luggage, get a rental car, go back to a hotel, which is only 15 minutes away. The rental car building is right next to the airport. You get a little tiny shuttle. You ride over. You get your car and you move along. But here's what happened. So she lands at 11:15 p.m. It shouldn't have taken her more than an hour to get a rental car, and that's giving her a lot of leeway. It ends up being like 3:15 in the morning that my dad gets an email confirmation that she's picked up the rental car. So from 3:15 in the morning, so now we got almost 4 hours later, and my mom then takes another hour or so to get to the hotel. And at that point, my dad, that's all the contact he's had is the notification the plane landed. He's got a notification from the rental car company. She picks it up. And he's got a notification from the hotel that check-in has occurred. So at 4 something in the morning, he texts me and says, Billy, message me when you get up. Message me when you get up. And so when I get up, I see it at 6:30 a.m. my time in southern Utah. I'm 2 hours behind Ohio. And I message my dad and tell him, hey, what's going on? He says, here's what I know. Your mom landed at 11:15. She didn't pick up the rental car till 4 hours later at 3:15. And she didn't get to the hotel until over an hour after that, which was only 15 minutes away from the rental car place. So we're like, okay, let's just chill out. Let's see what happens. We expect my mom to show up maybe, noon, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. By the time 1 o'clock comes, we're like, okay, let's revisit this. Me, my dad, and my brother are like, what can we do? So my dad calls the hotel, and he is on the phone with security. He can't get them to do anything because of privacy law. So I call up and say, look, I don't need any information from you. Just go check on my mom. Go do a wellness check. So they go do a wellness check. My mom was supposed to check out of the hotel at 11 a.m. It is now 1:30-ish, and they say her luggage is still in her room. They can't tell me anything about her, but they say she was supposed to check out. Luggage is still in the room. They finally, because they're a casino, right part of this hotel, and my mom likes to gamble, my dad challenges them to check out her player's card where it's plugged in. And because you put your player's card into the various games that are out there, and you get extra points if you've got some kind of like membership with that hotel or that casino. And so they figure out where my mom is, and at 2:30 she calls us. And she says, okay, I'm in town. Let me take a shower. I'll be right over. And here she hasn't checked out. So 2:30, we're like, okay. She goes upstairs. She checks out. She takes a shower. She comes to see us. 5 o'clock, we should expect her. At 5:30, she's still nowhere in southern Utah. And my dad just sees a notification that she had just taken out another $120 to gamble at the casino. My mom loves to gamble, but something's not right. Something's not working in her head right. She was supposed to check out hours ago. She's supposed to come see her grandson in southern Utah, and she just cannot stop this loop inside her head of staying at these casino games and continuing to play the slot machines. So finally, I reach out to some friends that live in Vegas, and at 6 o'clock, I send a couple of friends to the casino to try and find her. They walk in, and right away they hear over the loudspeaker my mom's name being called. And so they know that she's there. They're looking for, one is outside looking for a vehicle in the parking lot. The other one is walking all over the casino trying to find her.
I'm amazed they found her.
Yeah, and they did. This is a smaller casino in Vegas, so they finally locate her at 7 o'clock. And the moment they say they see her, and they send me a picture and I verify that's her, I grab my wife and we jump in my van and we drive to Vegas as fast as we can. And at 9 o'clock p.m., I pick my mother up from the casino and ask her to get in the van. We leave her rental car there because at this point I'm just not going to take the chance. And we take her back to southern Utah. It's a little over 2 hour drive back. And we take her to her hotel that she's got. It's only a couple blocks from my house, and my house is already full of people. And she was well enough to be able to, stay at her hotel. But by the next day, so that night, she had a little bit of a slur. And you could tell she wasn't thinking very well. She was struggling with some mental capability. And the next morning when my son went to pick her up, he saw the same traits. And then by noon that day, she was right back to her normal self. She wasn't slurring. She was witty. She was talking fast. She was having an easy time pulling out thoughts and memories and information. She had no problem staying on task. And so there was like this 24-hour blip of getting off this airplane, her just struggling to get to the places she needed to get to, and eventually almost kind of, conscious and awake, but also somewhat mentally paralyzed in this loop of staying at these slot machines and never getting up and leaving when she was supposed to leave.
That's crazy.
Like the human brain is it's a strange thing when things aren't working right, when there's some kind of glitch in the system.
It's crazy. I'm floored that they were able to find her, and really glad that you guys got to spend some time with her.
Yeah, it was really good. She was here for 3 days, and we just had a really good time. And then we took her back up to Vegas and got her on her airplane, got her back home, and all of it went really well. But it's just an insane day of things supposed to happen a certain way, and most of the time, we have no problem completing tasks and setting priorities and keeping schedules and knowing when we have to do things and by what time these things have to be completed. And then sometimes we have a unique situation where our brain just doesn't do what it's supposed to do.
Man, I feel like my brain doesn't do what it's supposed to do all the time.
I'm feeling that way this morning. You talked a little bit to me yesterday. Tell me your story.
Oh, that's the problem, Bill. It's a lot of story.
Yeah, there's a lot of story, which I think is going to point to a lot of shadow work that all of us are doing, and we're just going to use the example this morning.
Yay.
You're the lab rat.
I'm not really excited about it, but
well, let's do it
there.
anyway.
We'll
okay.
go there.
You tell it.
So, like you said, we all have stories going on, and it's, for me, I'm just trying to learn a healthier way to tell the story rather than the story always being about my world falling apart. So, a few weeks ago, Kelsey and I were invited to a get-together down in Las Vegas, and this was something that was new for us, and so we decided to check this party out, and some of the people that were there, we had found out were swingers, and some of them were not, and I don't care what people choose to do, but Kelsey ended up having quite a bit to drink, and so she was intoxicated, and I had my fair amount, and we had been talking to different people throughout the night, and at one point I was sitting and talking to this guy, and he was watching his wife make out, not his wife, his partner, they're not married, but they'd been together for a long time. He was watching his partner make out with another guy, and I was just like, I don't think I could do that. I don't think I could share my wife. I'm very jealous, and I don't think that I would have an easy time with that. And he was explaining that it's about trust, and they love each other, and he knows that she's always coming home to him and vice versa. And he said to me, I bet if you asked your girl right now to go, she would get up and go. And so in my stupor, I lean over. Kelsey was sitting on the other side of the couch, and I say, hey, babe, let's go. And she was like, no, we can't go right now. And in my head, I interpreted that as she's having too much fun. She wants to be here with other people. She doesn't want to go home with me. Oh, man, I'm such a piece of shit.
Right, you're telling a story in your head.
Right.
Because this guy had set you up. This guy, hold on. So this is important because this guy, he's telling you what tasks to do.
I did not realize what was happening.
He's telling you what task to do. You're half in the bag. So you lean over to say like, oh yeah, this guy's onto something. I'm gonna challenge my girl to see if she'll do what I tell her to do, and she doesn't.
Right.
And so now you're in your head going like, oh, the sky is falling. Yes.
So immediately in my head, stories start, right? And what was happening was Kelsey was feeling too drunk to make a decision to leave. She was feeling some nausea and wanted to just kind of settle things down before we left. And she wasn't able to drive. And so that's her rationale for saying, no, let's stay here.
Right. She's making a informed decision inside her head, like, look, I'm too gone to try and go right now. Plus, neither one of us can drive right now.
Right.
So the rational, logical answer from her story inside her head is like, no, we can't leave right now. We have to stay longer.
Right.
Meanwhile, you're feeling like, hey, I'm telling you that I want to leave, and we should leave, and you should love me enough that you compromise your night to make sure that I'm safe if I need to go. And so now you have these competing stories.
Right. So I'm sitting there and totally in my head, I'm starting to spiral.
Or go down the rabbit hole, as we like to call it.
I know, I started. And so Kelsey, she keeps talking to who she's talking to. This guy's he's still talking to me. And then Kelsey gets up and she says, I've got to pee. I'll be right back.
Right. And time is already off.
It is.
Because you're right, because you're under the influence of alcohol, and so time isn't exactly what it's supposed to be. And your girl says, look, I'm just going to go pee, and I'll be right back.
Right back, right. And so what seemed like hours go by, and she doesn't come back, and this guy, he's like, where's your girl? Where'd she go? And I'm like, I don't know. She said she'd be right back. And he's like, she's not. That probably means she's hooked up with someone. And I'm like, what? What is happening?
This guy doesn't sound like a cool dude. This guy he knows he's sending you down stories. He knows he's causing you anxiety.
We're also making up stories about him. He's not here to tell his story, so I'm not going to tell his story.
So he has a version too where he's just trying to help you out.
Maybe.
But you're right. We're telling his story, so let's stop it. Let's let him speak for himself. If he wants to come forward and do an interview on the Almost Awakened and tell us how this went down, we can do that. But he's telling you, like, look, your girl probably just went off with somebody and is hooking up.
Right.
And you're in this mindset like, oh my gosh, maybe that is what happened.
Maybe that's true.
So then you go looking for her.
So I can't see her anywhere, and I'm talking to two of my other friends that had come to this get together, and I'm like, I can't find Kelsey. And so they look for her, and I don't know, they've got different versions of the story as well. One of them says that at some point they told me she was down in the bathroom, but I don't remember that part. And so I go outside with one of my friends because he's like, maybe she went outside to get some air. So we go outside and we're looking for her, and he's like, do you think she would have walked home?
Which is now putting another story in your head.
So
now you're like, maybe she did walk home.
Maybe she did. So I'm outside. It's cold. I'm crying. My two friends are taking turns holding me while I ugly cry. And there were like 10,000 stories in my head about what had happened and what kind of person I was. And it was not good. It was not good. So I end up finding her. I end up finding where she's at. One of our friends found her. She was downstairs in the bathroom puking her guts out. So we go back in the house, and I find out there's a basement. Had no idea there was a basement in this house, and Kelsey's down in the basement.
Those are facts we need when someone's missing.
Right? Essential. So I'm walking downstairs, and there's a woman that's walking. We pass each other in the stairwell, and she points at Kelsey. She looked at me, points at Kelsey, and says, "Not your shit." And again, another story in my head was like, oh, damn, they've been talking about me.
They've been talking about you.
Kelsey's just laying it all on the line about how crappy I am. And
yeah, So again, who knows what's going on? Of course, you find out later, but who knows what's going on? But in your head, you're like, shit, this chick's talking about me. And this chick's talking about the fact that Kelsey's talking about me, and now she's just giving some kind of judgment call as she walks away.
Yeah. So it turns out, that there were a lot of things that were happening behind the scenes that I wasn't aware of. Kelsey said that she needed to go to the bathroom, but she really went to go throw up, and she was really nauseated and sick. And
which takes longer than it does to pee.
Right. And while she was downstairs talking or throwing up, somebody had come to check on her and comfort her and help her feel better. And while she was doing that, they started talking about something completely unrelated. They weren't talking about me. They were talking about Kelsey's stuff and stories that she gets going in her head. And so the context was completely different. And long story short, I have to figure out a way to not go to the worst stories.
And I think a lot of people do this. A lot of people are in their heads worried about 50 different potential negative outcomes instead of just letting the one positive outcome that's going to happen.
Yeah. But even just the emotion attached to the story, I've got to figure out a way to sit with the discomfort, the tension, the anxiety, whatever it is, and not make up a story about what I'm feeling to try and make the feelings go away or get better. And I've got to figure out a way to not go to the negative stories so quickly.
Yeah, I think when we're having interactions with the world, specifically with other people, there are a multitude of ways to interpret events as they happen. And when we're healthy and when we're not feeling anxiety and when we feel safe in the world, we generally interpret those events in ways that don't add to our anxiety or our fear or our worry. But when we already start with the ground of like, I'm already feeling anxiety, I'm already worried, I'm already nervous about how this is going to go, it seems like our minds are then drawn to take the events as they happen in front of us and interpret them in ways that we come to like, oh, worst case scenario, that's probably what happened. My girl probably hooked up with somebody and then she walked home in the middle of the night, half in the bag, which doesn't make any sense, right? Like it doesn't make any sense. And yet when we're already worried about the world around us crumbling, we tend to perceive events in front of us in the worst way possible.
Yeah, so that's something that I'm working on. Because even in the moment, it was interesting. I had a couple of thoughts that I remembered coming to my head. As I was sitting outside, I thought of Malcolm Gladwell's book, and he talks about alcohol. And sometimes when people use alcohol, they get myopic, meaning they only focus on one thing. Their brain can't process anything other than kind of what's in front of them. And I remember thinking that and thinking, I got to get out of this. I got to get out of this myopic thought. But I didn't possess the brain capacity to be able to pull myself out of it at that point. But I've got to figure out how to do it, because it affects not only me, but it affects other relationships, and I don't want to damage those other relationships that I have with people.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I think that we're all, so substances, like we're talking alcohol here in this instance, I think when anybody tries to alter their consciousness, when you're in the right set and setting, those can be really beautiful or fun experiences. But when the set and setting is already has some negativity to it, or and again, no offense to the guy sitting next to you, but your myopic negativity started long ago earlier in that conversation, as he's talking and he's planting the seeds of negative things happening, and you're suddenly having this self-doubt. And it's really easy in situations like this to realize like, oh, let's go back in time and look at the entire thing as it unfolded and see what led to this emotional breakdown, scared to death that your girl either had ran off and hooked up with somebody, which was an absurd thought, but it was already planted, this negativity, or the idea that she would just get up and just walk home in the middle of the night, half in the bag, which also, like, yes, some people do that, but most people know better than to do that, and Kelsey's one of those people who knows better than to do something like that. And yet here you are telling yourself, without any negative interaction really between you and Kelsey, right? Like you didn't have a fight.
We prior to that had been having a great time.
Right. And so this guy sends you down kind of, and again, we're not going to blame him. We're just going to say, like, this is what humans do. We have conversations, and we're always interpreting what the other person's saying. The other person's assuming whether we're getting a laugh out of it or whether we're actually having these negative thoughts in our head. He doesn't know that. And so it just kind of sends you, there's this fork in the road, and now you go down this other angle, and you're in this pit of negativity. And so now everything is, the sky is falling.
Yeah.
And so I think humans have got to learn to just pause and sit with things and try to kind of let things unfold. Almost when we think a situation is life or death, or we think a situation is make or break, and usually it's not. Usually it's much gentler than that. But we're often in our heads just coming up with the worst case scenario and then trying to protect ourselves against it.
Yeah, it's interesting because not everybody goes there. Not everybody goes to the place that the sky is falling. Some people do, and it's interesting that some people don't. I think it's part personality, but part training yourself to sit with the emotions that are coming up rather than jumping to the stories in your head to try and explain the emotions that are coming up. Yeah,
so I can tell you, and again, this is going to sound arrogant to the audience, but
we already know, Bill.
I'm one of those.
You always have your shit together.
Well, no, okay, you know better than that. I just hide it really well, right? Like for the most part, I can kind of keep it out of the public eye. But I'm one of those that generally can sit with those feelings and thoughts of negativity and not kind of spiral out. And people, maybe you look at me and others probably look at me and go like, he just has his shit together. And the reality is, no, I have those initial thoughts of like, oh my gosh. In fact, I remember just about a week ago, I'm laying on my couch, I'm sitting with my wife, and we're just having just the two of us a night together. And she's just eating her dinner while I lay on the couch and listen to music. And I'm just looking at her, and we were getting along. We didn't have any kind of conflict. And suddenly I'm looking at the body language on her face, and I'm making this, like, this story just starts inside my head that she doesn't love me. She doesn't care about me anymore. She wants out of this relationship. And like, this thought is only like 3 seconds long. And then she gets up, and it's always like the timing of these things. Had she looked over and smiled and said, I loved you at that moment, that thought would have just disappeared. But instead what she does is, as I'm having that thought, she says, excuse me, and she gets up from the couch and goes to rinse her plate off in the kitchen. And she's just like has this dry face as she's doing all of this. And I'm just in my head going like, oh my gosh, it like fed it. And so now I'm 12 seconds in, and I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, the world is crumbling. I have those thoughts too. And I don't know what the difference is. It is personality differences. We talk about the Enneagram or different types of personalities. Some of us handle stressors better. Some of us are more triggered by things. Some of us have life experiences. You know, if you had a life experience where every time something negative appeared to be going on, like it really wasn't, and your family life was okay, then you learn to be like, oh, most of the time these things work out just fine. And if you have a life experience where shit always does hit the fan and shit always does, crumble around you, then it perfectly makes sense that you're going to spiral out when these things happen. So when these stories come into my head, I just sit with them for a bit and I go like, okay, I could entertain those, but I'm just going to hold it for a minute, and I'm going to wait until like data and time and experience bears out what's really going on here. And I'll just kind of sit with that discomfort and let it kind of occur. But I have those thoughts too. I'm spiraling in various moments.
In different ways.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Every day of my life as well.
Yeah. Kelsey and I have been talking about that. We both spiral, just in different ways. Mine tends to be more emotional and outwardly visible. But that doesn't mean that, one way's better than the other. It's just a matter of recognizing what each of our patterns are, and then trying to have some understanding and compassion for each other. And I would have to say, I think that the Enneagram has really helped us understand our personalities better. If you haven't taken the Enneagram test, I highly encourage you to do it. You're an 8 or a 9, Bill?
I'm an 8 with a 9 wing.
And I'm a 1 with all the wings.
Tell me, you're okay. So say that again. You're a what? A 1?
I'm a 1, which is the reformer or the perfectionist.
Okay. So the reformer, how does the reformer act out? What are they trying to do? So
it's interesting because I retook the test yesterday, and anyway, I'm not gonna go there because it pisses me off. But the reformer is always looking for a better way to do it, to do something. Not that people are doing it wrong. It's just that's our MO. And we may have talked about this before with the dishwasher.
Right. You want it done. A
particular way.
And
I'd like
to
order.
You, it's the best way.
To me, it's the best way. And Kelsey's way is very haphazard in my perception. She thinks it's amazing, but her perception is different. And so we would have this little conflict about the dishwasher, and it used to just like irritate me so much because I'd be like, the bowl does not go in the dishwasher that way. And
there is one right way to do this thing. I've done it the right way for years, and I need you to conform. Yeah. Right. So the perfectionist needs everything right, and there is a right way to do it, and you're going to achieve it. And if somebody's doing it another way, you're going to look for a better way to do it. So you're going to reform something. Like, it's not that it's broken, but we could probably do it better, so let's change it up.
Yeah.
Okay. As an 8, I'm a justice warrior. I am, if there is anything out of place in terms of how someone's being treated or whatnot, I have to intervene. And I will intervene to the point where whoever I judge to be the party guilty of being overbearing or causing trauma, I will be a complete ass to them, regardless of whether they really are the guilty party or not. And so in each of these Enneagram numbers, it shows up as a gift. Like, Mikkel, you, in a reformer, you're making the world a better place. Your effort is to make a world a better place. The justice warrior is looking to relieve those who are marginalized. But in the same side, we also have shadow in each of those.
Right.
And so the reformer can demean others as they try to impose that their way is the best way, even though there may not be a right or a wrong way to doing something.
Right.
It just matters how effective it is in getting the job done. And as a justice warrior, I am pissing people off left and right when I get in their face and all they want to do is just be left alone.
Yeah. So it's been interesting to see that piece of who we are, and it does, in some cases, make it easier to understand why someone behaves the way that they do. Not that it's an excuse, but it's just insight.
Right. And like I pointed out before, nobody should, again, we all handle these things differently. And you're saying, like, there's not a right or wrong way. It's just the way we do it. Like, we're all doing human the best way we know how. And when I look at, like, your life story, like, when I see your childhood and the things you had to deal with growing up and some of the things that you encountered, like, it only makes sense that you're going to be a little more prone to spiraling outwardly when somebody else might be able to safely hold on to it and let it pass. We need to just be charitable and compassionate towards each other and make space for all of these personality differences and allow people to be human the best way they know how.
Yeah.
And also calling us to improve and calling us to do shadow work and calling us to make some kind of steps in being more aware of those mechanisms and to slowly improve them. I'm not that much better than I was 5 years ago, but I am better. You're not that much better than you were 5 years ago, but you are better. And it shows up, and it's beautiful to watch us humans grow and to develop. But man, like you pointed out and I pointed out before, it's a ton of work and it takes a ton of time.
It is. It's a ton of work. It's a ton of time. And it's a ton of, like, self-reflection. You have to be willing to acknowledge the parts of you that you've tried to hide for so long. It was funny last night, Bill, when we were hanging out with our friends, our friend, his younger brother came down from Salt Lake. Were you there when they got there?
Yeah, I was there when they got there. Yep.
It was, we hung out till probably 2 a.m. Just talking to these guys and just hanging out. And you know me, I'm not shy. And so two of them were sitting on the sectional outside, and there was enough space that, you know, they weren't sitting close, but there was not enough space for another person to sit in between them. And so I just walked over there. I said to our one friend, I said, I'm going to make them really uncomfortable. And she was like, oh shit, what's going to happen? And I went and sat because I like that, because it sort of forces people to confront, why am I feeling uncomfortable? Why does this feel so weird to me? So I squeezed myself in between these two people, and I held both of their hands, and you can see it.
Oh, I know you. I know. Like, there's no doubt that you just walked right over, sat between them, and made them uncomfortable.
And it was awesome. It was so awesome. The one guy on my left sat there for a little bit, and I could tell he was like stiff as a board. And he eventually made an excuse to get up and refused to come sit by me again, which was fine. But our friend's brother sat with me, and their cousin was on the other side of him, and we were all just talking, and we were talking about the podcast and being human, and two of the guys have been through divorces, and so we were comparing stories and sharing some of our collective pain and trauma through going through divorce. And one guy at one point said, you know, you and Kelsey are the first lesbians I have ever met. They're almost 40 and never come in contact.
Yeah. Mm.
And so it was awesome that way, because their perception of what lesbians are or how they should behave, I think was shattered a little bit. In more ways than one.
I love it. I love it, because I think that's so key, is us confronting new things, new ideas. Like we, again, tell stories to ourselves about what lesbians look like or what lesbians act like or what, and we grow up in certain systems, we grow up in certain family dynamics. And to confront on any issue, to confront a liberal when you're a conservative, to confront someone homosexual when you've been raised to think a certain way about that your whole life, to confront different ethnicities, to confront different political systems, different types of human beliefs or behaviors. Like anytime we confront diversity and sit with it for a while, I think we have to confront like our own beliefs and opinions and start to think deeply about those. And often that's where real changes occur.
Yeah, if we're willing.
If we're willing. How did it go? How did the whole night go? We left probably around 11:30-ish, 11:45. You guys were there a few more hours. It was still a lot of fun.
Yeah, so much fun. Just talking, just having conversation. It was good.
Yeah. I was... go ahead.
I'm tired.
Yeah, me too. And you're more tired than me because I got to bed
I'm too old for this.
Yeah, that's just it. Having grown up in a system, a religious system, where you and I couldn't enjoy the normal young adult experience, we were in a system that told us that we had to be really good and we couldn't drink, couldn't hang out with the wrong people, and it told us what the wrong people meant. And so now here we are in our 40s, essentially doing what the college, what other people in the world do at the college age, and we're late to this game, and it does take a toll on us when we're this age to get back up and do a podcast in the morning. Yeah,
but it's a blast. I love it. I got a text message this morning from a friend saying, it was just before we started. She said, "I'm on my way to Salt Lake. I'm listening to your podcast. You're amazing."
Yeah, I'm having a lot of fun with this too. People keep asking like, what are you doing? And the thing I always want to talk about is you and me doing this podcast. That's the new fun thing in my life, and it's so enjoyable. I was at the party last night, the first one that we went to, and man, the hosts they're super cool, super nice. I love them to death. I hope they're not offended that I left a little early, but I couldn't be in that space. I had had a few drinks before I'd gotten there, and I just was not functioning in a large group the way I would feel comfortable. And so I asked my wife if we could go. And then we went over to where a couple other friends had kind of gathered that night and just sat in a quieter space. And it was much more conducive to me being okay. But as I'm talking to our friend Ben, him and I were looking around the room and just watching. There's a certain ritual, and I mean this in the truest sense of ritual. When you go to a party, it really is a ritual. And you look around and everybody interacts in these, you can almost see it play out and you can almost write down what's going to happen. But as people begin to talk and share time with each other, there is this interaction of trying to kind of figure out where we belong in this group of people. And then at some point, someone breaks that interaction off and these people move on to somewhere else. And now these people talk and it affects that group. So now they split off at some point and they go talk to different people. And I look at like, it's only been maybe a couple 100 years where humans have gotten together on the weekend to go to someone's house and have drinks and have a party. But if you go back like 5,000 years or 10,000 years, this same dynamic played out in a different way, probably around a fire somewhere. And it's interesting to watch humans as they try to figure out their roles. They try to figure out how they belong, try to figure out who they can trust and who they can't, who they have things in common with and who they don't. This thing we call a party is really a fun exercise of human behavior if you sit back and just watch people interact with each other. And Ben and I were just looking at that and talking about it and then laughing at ourselves as we were doing the very same thing, talking to each other. It was quite an interesting thing when you become aware of some of those dynamics when they're playing out. Just like you were talking about at the party when you said you recognized, what was it? The
myopic?
Yes. Like you were in your head, you were aware that you were being myopic, and yet there you are doing that very thing.
Right.
And so we watch these mechanisms play out that we've developed over tens of thousands of years. And it just because, here it is 2019, and even when you know how these things work, you get lost in being in them yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard for me at times to not get frustrated with that. I expect a lot of myself, which again is part of the reformer. But I'm also learning to be more kind and patient to myself. We were talking with this group of friends last night. I don't know if you guys were there at this point, but I think that you were. But I was talking to Amanda because she and I are alike in that way. We both tend to spiral, and it tends to be really emotional and dramatic and all the things. And I said to someone at some point, but I think it was Amanda, I said, you wouldn't talk to a little girl or a kid or, your friend the way that you talk to yourself in those moments, because we're really good at beating ourselves up. So we've got to stop. We've got to stop doing that. So she and I made a commitment last night to each other that we're gonna try. We're gonna try a little harder. We're gonna do a little better, and also make room for ourselves to make mistakes.
Yeah, because we're gonna make them. Like, that's human to make mistakes.
Yeah, it is. It sucks.
Yeah, I don't. There's no better way to do it. Whatever. Again, every species on this planet, plant life, trees, dogs, giraffes, dolphins, whales, and again, I don't know how developed their consciousness is, but something happened 20,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, whenever it was. Something happened where humans became something different than that. The way in which we think about situations as they're happening, the way we can plan for the future, and yet within us are all these mechanisms that we've just brought along for the ride for all those years as well. And that combination just makes being a human so quirky and strange, and yet we've come up with all these arbitrary constructs in order to make sense of the world in front of us and to be able to look at each other and make sense of each other, to pick out similarities and differences, to pick out boundaries and codes of ethics and codes of etiquette and all the things we do to kind of just live in the same space with each other. And in reality, we're so different. Like, you are so different from me. And in some ways really the same, but in some ways so different. And it's a miracle that we ever can really even get close enough to thinking we understand exactly what the other person is doing. Right. Yeah, it is. It's strange. And along with that comes mistakes. We're going to goof up. And all of us make mistakes. We all make mistakes. Some of them are serious. But hell, like, what is a life if we don't make some serious mistakes too? Yeah. It would be pretty boring if we didn't make mistakes. But life is so good. It's so good. Yeah. And most of the time we get it right. I'm just guessing. Yeah, but most of the time you guess right. You get up in the morning, you turn your alarm clock off, you go to work, you show up on time, you do your job, you go home, you make dinner, you watch your kids, you put them to bed. Life has a sense of order, and most of the time things are going the way they're supposed to kind of go. And then, 5% of the day, 3% of the day, 2% of the day, whatever it is, we're screwing 98%. We're screwing shit up. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm just learning to accept it more and be kinder to myself and realize that my shit is your shit too. Yeah, we all have shit. Some of it is shared. Some of your shit's my shit. Some of your shit's different, but how can I judge it when I have my own different shit that's my own problem? Right. So yeah, to be kinder, be compassionate to each other, and I think knowing human behavior, learning about human behavior, trying to understand human behavior makes me gentler on myself, and it also makes me gentler on others. And I think it makes life interesting when you start seeing the mechanisms and you're aware of how they're playing out in someone else as well as in yourself. Yeah. What else you got? My hair smells like campfire, so... Yeah, we had a friend last night who poured gasoline. I was a little nervous. It wasn't gasoline, it was lighter fluid. It looked like it was in one of those red gasoline pails. Are you sure it was lighter? You're sure? I saw a small stream, what looked like lighter fluid. Okay. I did not see. See, this was a story in my head. I saw him pouring a small red 1-gallon pail of gasoline all over the fire, and I could smell the gasoline. Oh, I didn't smell gas. I just smelled smoke. I know. That's my story in my head. And so you see him pouring just a bottle of lighter fluid, and I'm here thinking like he's going to blow the whole house up. And we were like 5 feet away from him. And he goes like you, and he's one of these guys that if you have a story in your head where like you show fear, he's gonna laugh at that and play games with it. And so he lights the thing and acts like he's got his eyebrows singed, and so it just plays into the story even further. It was a lot of fun. Funny.
So much fun.
Really good night last night. Both places were fun to be at, and it was enjoyable. And I apologize for my limitedness in those conversations, but it was fun to be around people and just have a good time and laugh at a bunch of things. What else? What are we going to do next week?
It's your turn next week, so why don't you tell me? You've probably already got it planned out and had it planned out for a month.
Yeah, I've got an outline. I've got lots of resources I'll send you.
I don't want to hear it.
Let's see. Next week, I think we do have to get into sexuality. I think it's an important concept of awakenness. So I've got two things. One is I want to interview more people, so we maybe will interview someone. And the other is that if we don't interview someone, I think the topic's going to be sexuality.
Okay.
So be prepared next week for a fun conversation.
I'm not going to prepare myself.
No. I'm talking to the audience. I want them to prepare themselves. I want them to spend a lot of self-reflection time getting ready for next week's Almost Awakened.
Sounds good.